Okay, Bill.
It is my pleasure to introduce John Kennedy from the East Central Ohio Technology Users Club, who will be giving a presentation on easy transitions from Windows to Linux. John is the APCUG advisor for both Region 3 and Region 6. He is also a member of the APCUG Speakers Bureau. He has done a number of web presentations for computer groups around the country and has often presented at regional conferences in Ohio. John got his feet wet with his first Atari personal computer. From that, he continued with different mainline PCs until he built his first computer when he retired. John taught elementary school for 25 years and finished his career by teaching computer skills to middle schoolers for 10 years. During those years, he was introduced to the Linux operating system. Since retiring, he has spent his time teaching senior citizen computer classes, known around his area as Free John. John does just about everything on the computer with free and open source software. His preferred operating system, Linux. John also spends many hours helping both Windows users and Linux users with their personal computer problems. In addition to heading the senior teaching program, he co-hosts the ECOTUSC Linux Help Desk SLIG that meets twice a month. With the deadline for Microsoft dropping support for Windows 7 coming in a couple of months, and following that with Windows 8, many Windows users are wondering what options they have. Comes with Windows 10. They can hope that their older computer can be upgraded to Windows 10, or they can consider switching over to Linux, which is both free and works great on older computers. Learn how easy it is to transition to Linux with some cross-platform programs that you might already be using. John will be sharing the programs he used while as a Windows user that he still uses as a Linux user. Using these programs will make the transition to Linux a breeze. And it's my pleasure to give the platform to John.
Thank you much, Bill. I don't have to worry about recording because it's stuck. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, sharing with you about easy transitioning from Windows to Linux. I made that transition a number of years ago. Reasons we want to transition or might need to transition. As most of you should know by now, come January 2020, a couple of months, Windows 7 will no longer be supported by Microsoft. No more security updates, no more feature updates, just kind of a dead in the water like Windows 7 is already. And that will be followed by Windows 8.1. 8's been gone for a while. Now, your current operating system won't be getting the updates, and your option will be to pay to upgrade to Windows 10. And there are a number of people who say, especially in my category of retired, don't have the extra money to do that. The other issue is that some of us have computers that we've had for a number of years, and it won't meet the specs of Windows 10. Our computer club does a lot of repairs. Heard the unofficial date line that says that Microsoft won't guarantee that anything that's 10 years old will work with the current edition of Windows. And I even saw on somebody's computer that their like 1903 wouldn't be supported after the new one that's coming out in this fall. And not only do you not want to purchase a new license for Windows, you don't really want to purchase a new computer because, hey, yours is working for pretty good now. Also, there are concerns about how much control you have over your operating system. And some people want more control and better security. Linux has support that goes on almost indefinitely. There are different types of Linux distributions, whereas there's only one type of Windows system. The support will go on and on and on. Some of them have lengths, but you can change it because it's free. There are things called rolling releases that are always going to be getting updates, and never until your computer dies do you have to change anything. If you don't like the version of Linux that you're running, we have more than 100 different versions. Some of them are very slight. Some of them are designed for a very specific user group, but there are a ton out there, and you don't like what they've changed, you can pick up a different one. It's free, won't cost you anything more. We have certain distributions of Linux that are designed specifically to work on older computers with less RAM, less processing power. So if you have an older computer, there's no worry that you won't be able to keep running it. There's out there for it. Linux is open source, and that provides us with the most secure of the operating systems because it's very evident of what's going on. If you're a coding person, if you're a person like me that doesn't code, you don't worry because somebody's going to take care of things right away. I'm sure that if you've had meetings or you've talked with other people, they'll tell you that Linux is really, really different. Well, it's not. There is what they call the command line, and even Windows has that, but very few people delve into that area. But you can get into that and do some code or work with just your text-based stuff like we did in the old DOS days. But it's in Linux, but you're not required to use it. There are many people who have never even opened up the terminal to make anything like that. You don't have to use it. Actually, Linux can look very much like Windows if you want. We have one version of Linux that if I throw it up in front of you, you would think you were using Windows XP. It looks so much like it. But the real key to the transition to Linux is software. And my transition was very easy because in the last years that I was using Windows, I was using software that worked on Windows, and it was going to be the same that I was using in Linux. So I'm going to share with you the kind of software I was using when I was a Windows user, and then obviously you'll know that whatever I was using on Windows is being used, or I was using them on Linux. So I figured I'd pick these 5 main areas of things that I do and most people do on a computer. Things like in the internet and communicating with people, the productivity, audio and video, and graphics. And so what I hope to do is be able to show you that some of these softwares that you might be using would be the same ones you'd use in Linux, and it's no big deal. In a lot of my Linux presentations, I talk about how things are related with cars. We have lots of different cars, different manufacturers, different models, and they all pretty much do the same thing. But when you get inside one of them, dials and knobs and buttons might be in little different places. Same thing with Linux. Everything's the same, it works the same, it runs the same, but something might be in a different position. But the beauty about Linux is that you can customize and change things and make it really comfortable for you. I'll share what it looks like later. Now, I'm not going to show you all the possible cross-platform programs because there's thousands out there that can be used by Windows, Mac, Linux. I'm just going to use the ones that help me with my transition to make it so easy. Now, currently, I'm not always using the exact same programs that I was using before because over the years, I found programs that I liked better. Not that the programs are better, but that I like them better. And since that's the whole thing with computers, you make it so it's what's best for you. I also apologize as I'm fighting over the last of a cold. I'm sure many of you in the northern half of the country and the Midwest and my regions are all fighting that too. So I'll try to make sure I flip the mic up and don't blow your out. Starting out with the internet, browsers are the most commonly used product. And as you can see, Firefox was my browser of choice. When I was running Windows, that's what I used. And so turns out Firefox is one of the most common browsers used in Linux. So knew how to use Firefox, comfortable with it. No problem going to Linux. I was comfortable with that. We also have, for people who use the Chrome, you can use Chrome on Linux, but Chrome came from what's called Chromium. That's the original, and then Google modified Chromium into their Chrome. Opera and Vivaldi started with Chromium and modified it. So there's two other ones that people use. So if you use Opera or Chrome on Windows, you can do it on Linux as well. And interesting, just as a side note, that the new Microsoft Edge that's coming out is also based on Chromium. And because it's open source, you can take that like a recipe and modify it. So Microsoft is modifying theirs as well. Now, for security, one of the things you'll hear is that Linux being open source is very secure. Most of us don't even use antivirus. We really don't need it. If there is a problem, something's discovered, it's rectified right away. I do have an antivirus program, but I use it so that if somebody gives me an external device, such as a thumb drive or a hard drive, I can scan it. Because even though my Linux isn't going to get affected by most of the viruses out there because they're written for Windows and exe files, and Linux doesn't run exe, if I would copy a thumb drive or over and give it to somebody else, I could be possibly a accomplice in passing viruses. So I have a virus program, but I'm not checking it for my Linux. I'm checking it for the devices that are passing through my computer. Also in internet security, passwords. We've talked hopefully in your groups many times about passwords. And originally I used LastPass in Windows, and then when I made the switch to Linux, LastPass was available because it's browser-based. I have switched from that when I found one I liked better. Xmarks used to be my bookmark program, and when I made the switch, all my bookmarks were right there. That had to be switched because Xmarks no longer is being maintained. So that's gotten changed. But that made it real easy because all of the passwords and all the bookmarks that I had when I had Windows, once I made the switch, they were all there and made it real easy for me. One of the nice things is because being web-based, all the extensions that I had in Firefox were able to be added to the Firefox in Linux. And if I had set up a Firefox an account, then it would have automatically all been switched over too. In internet too, we do a lot of searching, and I started using with the Windows DuckDuckGo because I prefer to be searching anonymous. But because being again web-based, you can use any search engine that you want. I teach people that you can use any web browser that you want, and with any web browser you can use any search engine. So no problem. I knew how to use those, and switching to Linux, there was nothing to worry about. Internet with storage, again, because it's cloud-based. Dropbox was with me in the early years of Windows, and Dropbox is an extension into Linux. It fits right into the file management program. And so all of the stuff that I had up in Dropbox was there when I made the switch to Linux. When we talk about communication, in the old days, we had client-based software that we installed on the computers. The original one, of course, would have been Outlook Express, but I switched to Thunderbird many, many years ago. And then on web-based Gmail, Thunderbird has a version that installs on Linux. So I knew how to run Thunderbird on Windows. And again, switching it to Linux, Thunderbird was no problem. So there was no learning curve there. And of course, Gmail with the browser-based mail. Also, if you're somebody who has Yahoo or Outlook Mail, AOL, all being web-based, no problem. You just start it up and go to it. For helping people with computer problems, I was using TeamViewer, where I was able to remotely access. Moving to Linux, they have a version, so I didn't lose any of that. I also used Skype beginning in the early days before it was bought out by Microsoft to be able to communicate with people all around the world. In addition, I needed to be able to have calendar, and Thunderbird has a partner program called Lightning. And so I had a calendar. And again, when we switched over, or I switched over to Linux, there was the exact same Lightning, and all my calendar worked just the same. And of course, for people who use Google, Google has Calendar along with their Gmail. And the one thing that really was nothing to do with Linux or with Windows is that Google and Lightning can interact, so that anything I put into Lightning would show up on Google. Anything I put in Google would show up on Lightning. That was just a nice side bonus that had nothing to do with me switching to Linux. Switching to productivity, the fancy word for anything that you produce yourself, I started using LibreOffice way back before it even existed, because before LibreOffice, it was OpenOffice, and before OpenOffice, it was called StarOffice. And so I've been using that for more than almost 2 decades. And so by the fact I was using it when I made the switch to Linux, there's a Linux version. So again, everything that I kind of knew how to do was just easily transferred. Now, I will say that sometimes the people who are responsible for developing the version for Windows and the version for, let's say, for Linux, like in LibreOffice, they have 2 different teams doing the same thing, but one team might make icons look a little bit different. Somebody has an idea, says, I like these kind of icons. So when you see my LibreOffice, you'll say, oh, that looks a little different than the LibreOffice I use in Windows. The only difference is, somebody designed icons just to be a little bit different. And so, of course, if you don't know, LibreOffice is a full suite of programs for text editing. Impress is their presentation program. You are watching that right now. This is a program made with Impress. They have a spreadsheet called Calc. They have an actual drawing program that is a high class, and it also reads PDFs. The other thing with LibreOffice is any program that you create in LibreOffice, no matter whether it's the spreadsheet, word processing, or the presentation, you can convert them to PDFs without having to go to an outside program. Now, sometimes your web browser at the old days did not have a PDF reader in them. You had to get a separate piece of software. And so the software that we found a long time ago for Windows was a program called Foxit. And sure enough, there's a version for Foxit for Linux. So using Foxit in Windows, no big deal to switch it over to using Foxit in Linux. I didn't do very much with publications, but back in my Windows days, in case I needed to make a flyer or maybe a small newsletter for some reason, the program Scribus or Scribus was there, and you learn how to use that one. Found out that in Linux there's the same program. So if I needed to do any kind of big publication, I could do it because it was the same program. And the better drawing program that's a little bit different than Paint, because this is what they call the vector drawing. So curves actually stay curves. Inkscape was the big program in Windows as an alternative, and it's also found in Linux as well. For audio and video, there's really, I think, nothing that can almost beat VLC for listening to your music and watching your videos. It's kind of like the program of all programs, and it can open up almost every kind of format for audio and video. It also does a lot of other things in it that as you discover VLC, you'll find it. And again, it has a version for Linux. So comfortable using VLC in Windows made it very easy to switch over and do the same sort of thing in Linux. I also used a program called Audacity to do sound editing, mostly for moving tapes and records, those old cassette tapes that you wanted to digitize. Audacity was a program I learned how to use. And then now that I've been on Windows for a number of years, Audacity is still the program. If I have to digitize something, I can use that. Handbrake was a program that if you wanted to rip a DVD, you were able to use it. I didn't do that very often, but it's there, and so if I needed to do that in Linux, I could be able to do that as well. In terms of graphics, I wanted something more than what was in the older Windows for photos. Now, granted, remember that programs have improved over the years. And what I found is, just like with browsers, when one browser gets a lot of extra new features, the other browsers follow suit and add more. So those go back and forth as to who has the best features. So the same thing with years ago with Windows. A program that I liked for looking at my picture folder and being able to do things with it was called XNView, and has been replaced now with an XNView MP. Multi-platform is what that stands for. And so it runs on both Windows and Linux. So you get comfortable with one, you're comfortable with the other. If you were into a big editing, photo editing work, there was a program called GIMP, Graphical or GNU Image Manipulating Program, was out there that you could do all sorts of photo editing. I never became really good at that because I'm just kind of like a simple editor, hit a button and say, clean it up a little bit. And XNView can do that too. But if you were doing a lot more photo editing, GIMP was out there, and it's in Linux as well. There are a lot of other programs out there. As I said, these were what I was using that helped me kind of make the transition. And so there's newer, improved ones on that. So the results of all of this, of using that software, most of it was open source because Free John got into that movement way back in the changing of the century, I guess that's what it would be. I became very comfortable with that software that I was using. And then when I was introduced to Linux and started getting to test it out, it was great to find out that I could use the same programs in Linux that I was in Windows. So when I made the switch, it wasn't any difficult at all. It was very smooth. It's like getting a new car. There are some little changes in it, but you get used to it. Once you know how to drive a car, steering wheel, brakes, gas, it's okay. Now, of course, if you go to England and you get in a car that the steering wheel's on the other side, that's going to take you some use or some time to get used to that. But otherwise, the same principles: turn the key, turn the wheel, steer, and whatever. So it made it very, very easy to go. So those were some of the software. There's lots more out there. I will say you won't find every piece of software that's available for Windows available for Linux. The two main programs that are always brought up in conversations about why I could never go to Linux would be Adobe, and Adobe chooses not to create software for Linux because with Linux having thousands of free programs, there's not a huge market for people willing to pay a lot of money for software. You can run Adobe in Linux. You have to use a special program to run it sort of like inside of a virtual window, but you can. But the problem with that is that when you run Windows programs inside of Linux, you tend to be also susceptible to getting viruses and malware that comes to Windows through into your machine. Not that would do much damage to yours, but again, files that you're creating and files that you might pass on to somebody, would be in question. The other one would be Microsoft Office. If you're a person who has to use Microsoft Office that is installed on your computer, not the cloud version, then you're not going to be able to do it. If you're using the cloud version of Microsoft Office products, no big deal because it's cloud-based. So whatever's cloud-based in Windows would be cloud-based in Linux as well. So what I thought I would do for the next few minutes is let some of you who may have never seen a Linux see and find out that it's a computer, it's an operating system. It works the same way as you work things in Windows. I use a mouse, I point and click and drop down menus and all things that are normal. So we're going to take a look. The version of Linux that I'm using is called MX. It's based off of a Debian, which is one of the oldest versions of Linux. And it's somebody who said, we'll take Debian and make it a little bit better. That's what happens in the Linux world. Somebody said, here's a product, a software operating system. It's good, but I can make it better. And we've all done that when you've done recipes that you've been passed on. You make modifications because you say, I can make it better. So you do. When you look at this Linux, you pretty much see the same what you see on your desktop. There are a few modifications. The main panel is at the top, but that can happen in Linux or in Windows. You can put the taskbar at the top, the bottom, left, or the right. So that part you ignore. But what you see is that I have two taskbars. I have one at the top and one at the bottom. And so I've added one extra one so that I can kind of customize what I do. My top one has my main programs. This one is the file manager. I mean the main menu, the file manager, the link to get into the terminal, which is not something most people have to do. And you can see there's my Thunderbird, Firefox, Chromium, and I have a Vivaldi. Sometimes I check websites to see how they look in different ones. In the center, you can see I have a calendar and my time. And on the far right, there's my icon to log out, just like sort of in the Windows, but instead of having a combined menu with start, I have just a separate log out, sign out. I also have a weather app. It's kind of nice. I'm living east of Columbus, and my weather comes next door in Granville, Ohio, and I have a weather feed in there. And then I have my other programs. There's my volume. There's my internet right next to it. And there's even a clipboard that's right there. Next to that is an interesting, whenever I have updates, I have a little green icon that turns red to let me know I have updates. And the one thing nice about Linux is that I don't do any updates unless I want to. And I can wait as long as I want. I can do it right away, but I have the control. At the bottom, I kind of have my secondary programs that I use. There's my team viewer, and there's VirtualBox that I use to run different operating systems inside a VirtualBox. One thing also that I have, like in Windows, there's a button that if I have Windows open, I can click one button and everything goes small. On the right-hand side, there are 5 little squares. There are 2 of them are filled in. One of them's filled in with the Zoom, and one of them's filled in with my presentation. But these are what Linux has had for many, many years, the virtual desktops. And I can put, as you can see on there, I can put different programs running on different desktops. Microsoft now has that available so that you can do the same thing that Linux has been doing for a number of years. If I click on the menu, you'll see that it's pretty much a just general same kind of menu. The only thing that's different that I really like about most of the Linux menus, and obviously you can change anything. The distributions that you get comes with all the software you need to do what you need to do. But if you find something you like better, you can install it and switch to it. I like menus that are set up in categories. The one thing that's always been a problem with me for the Windows is everything's in alphabetical order. And when you have software with strange names, oftentimes you don't know what those programs do. So many of the Linux distributions are set up in categories, so you can see on the left-hand side, and it could be on the right-hand side because you can move these around, that you can see we have the different groups with the accessories by itself, graphics. There's games that come with that. There's my internet, multimedia, office product, productivity, and other. So if you have something that really doesn't fit in any of those, you got an other. And then you have settings and systems. So I have access to all of my different categories right there easy, and I don't have to go through lots of software trying to find this particular one. Once you're inside a software area, you have them alphabetically, and you can have the choice in mind. I can either have the generic name of what it does or its actual real name. So I have it by the generic. For example, there's VLC, but it tells me this is the media player. I have two different media players, so I can have it. Now, if we look at the file manager, you will see that there's very similar things to what we used to call the Explorer, and now is called File Explorer. And I have the access to the different main folders on my devices. And what these are, instead of devices, I have multiple hard drives, internal and partitions. And so that shows up just like it would be like a thumb drive. And then down at the bottom, just like in Windows, I've got my places, and there's the same thing. So the file system is really no different than used to. Desktop, documents, music, downloads. My pictures aren't showing up on the places, but they're right there. So just like in Windows, I go to, user, there's me, and here's all my folders that I've got divided up. So it's a real easy system of alphabetical and to do mine. Also then I have a network one that if I have network attached devices, I would be able to access them through those links. I have the same kind of buttons that we do in Windows with the close and magnify or maximize and minimize. But this version I use with the menu system has a neat thing where there's another icon that if I click it, the program doesn't minimize. It just like a window blind. It just pops up and pops down without going away. I'm going to open up Firefox just so you can see that it works just like the regular Firefox. I have it set up to open up to two favorite web addresses at the same time. I used to do that in Windows, but because it's Firefox, all of the tools and areas are there. I don't have anything in the Firefox bookmarks because I use a separate web-based bookmark system. But as you can see that if I go to the preferences, that's going to be almost identical to what you would see. Close that one out. Close tab. Excellent. If I go to my word processing, there's the presentation. So I got to be careful on that. If I go to open up a new, I want to do a text. Come on. And if you think about Windows and Office before the ribbons, LibreOffice has said that the majority of people have indicated they like the more traditional menu system. And if you look at this, and if you look at the LibreOffice writer version in Windows, they would be almost identical, except, like I said, somebody designs and says, I like a different icon. So some of these icons, they're all the same tools that are in the Windows version, but they might look just a little bit different. And okay, so that you get used to a different looking icon, but when you get into a car, you have different buttons. I can still remember the days of the car radio that had the push buttons. And then they went from a round button to a square button. And now we have just the modern stuff. So you get used to that. But all the tools are the same, so there's no difference on that. Switch to a different desktop. If I open up my program, I showed you that one for multimedia. Graphics. XN View. This is the program I have, just like the one that runs in Windows. There it accesses my pictures folder, all the subfolders in the picture folder, and then all of the pictures that would be inside that. It's a real good program for Windows, and it's a real good one from here. But, you know, I knew how to use it in the other, so it worked out fine here. So as you can see, you know, all sorts of tools in terms of how Linux works. It works just like Windows. And I have other programs that I didn't use in Windows, but so many of the programs that I was comfortable using in Windows were the same ones I transitioned over. So, you know, my thoughts are that there are going to be some people who are going to be concerned about the change into Windows 10, losing the Windows, you know, 7, that if you wanted to be able to do this, one of the things you can do is start using some of that software now, and then by the time January comes, when you have to make a decision, if you've been using them, you know, not going to have a big problem.